All right, so let's go ahead and test out our tagged item model now inside of the Tags app. And the goal of this is to do a couple things. Number one is to learn more about how to use these generic foreign keys, right? So writing the tests here will at least give us some baseline that we can always reference in the future on how you can actually use generic foreign keys and that the generic related field as well from the playlist model. So let's go ahead and actually create our first test case by first off importing the tagged item model itself. So we'll go ahead and import tagged item and we'll set up class tagged item test case and test case. Now, with many test cases, what I'll often do is define the setup method first and actually create an item. So tagged item.objects.create and tag being my new tag. Okay, so we save that and let's go ahead and run our test on it. So python manage.py test and tags. I hit enter and let's just make sure I have everything saved up. I'm not getting any errors actually. So let's go ahead and test this even further and we'll go ahead and say tag A equals to that. And now we're going to go ahead and define test tag A and we'll go ahead and run. Let's just do self.assert is not none and self.tag a.pk. Okay, so this is just another way to do another kind of assert call and basically saying, hey, this is not a none item. Okay, so let's run that test again. Now I get an integrity error, right? So it's saying that I can't have the content type ID empty. Well, of course, in the model itself, so going back into the model, we see that content type is a required field. So for this particular generic foreign key, it is required. You don't have to make it required. And right now you might be like, oh, well, why don't I just not make it required? You could totally do that, but I'm actually not going to change the models. I'm just going to be focusing on the test itself and learn a new way of testing this particular model. So what you can do is you can actually use a test called assert raises. So basically we want to test that it's going to raise an exception. The exception in our case is the integrity error. This is the exception that was actually called, which typically when exceptions happen, they tell you what it is right here. So I can actually import that exception. Let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do from django.db.utils. We'll import the integrity error. And so now what I'm going to do is say self.assert raises and that integrity error. And instead of having the setup method actually create this and cause that error, we'll go ahead and put it inside of this test tag A method. And for now, in my setup method, I'll just say pass. Okay, so what we also want to do here is say with self.assert raises that integrity error, we can go ahead and try and create this. So really, this is going to go ahead and say test the content type is null or cannot be null, is not null, basically. Okay, so we run that again. And now we should actually get a successful call and a successful run. So assert raises is really nice for this method. But of course, we still need to actually create an item that actually works, right? And another thing to note is you can absolutely create things inside of any given test. It just might not be available to other tests, right? It will probably be self-contained to that test, where the setup method actually allows you to reuse created objects in your different tests, if that wasn't already clear. So let's go ahead and actually create a tagged item and actually add it into a generic foreign key. So what I mean is, let's go ahead and say, let's import from playlists.models. We're going to import the playlist model. And inside of my setup method, I'll just go ahead and create a playlist model, and we'll go ahead and self.play or ply obj equals to playlist.objects.create and title being new title. Okay, so with that, what I want to do is I actually want to create a tagged item with this. So how do we actually do this? So I'm going to define a test called create via content type. Okay, so what is this? What does this mean? Well, the playlist object itself is not a content type. We actually need to get whatever the model itself is. We need to get that content type. So there's a lot of different ways on how we could do this, but one of the ways is we can actually import the content type model, much like we did in the actual tagged item model or tags model. We can go ahead and do from django.contrib.content-types.models. We can import that content type model. And I can grab the actual playlist type from there. So we can say ctype equals to content type.objects.get app label being playlists, right? So we're getting the playlists that's from the app, so playlist, and then also the model itself, which is playlist. And this is only getting the content type of the playlist. We can absolutely get the model class itself by doing model class. That would actually give me the same value as this. But of course, we don't want to do that. Instead, what I want to do is just create a tag, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and say tag A equals to tagged item.objects.create the content type, this right here. So content type equaling to that, and then an object ID, just an arbitrary one. Now I can absolutely reference this object ID, or I can just give it an arbitrary one, because it should actually still work even if it's an invalid object ID. It should still actually be able to create it. So we can try that in just a moment. And I'll go ahead and say tag new tag. Okay, so all we want to do here is say self.assert is not none, and the tag a.pk. Okay, so let's go ahead and create one more thing with this, and we'll go ahead and give an arbitrary object ID, and then again we'll say not none, right? So I'll give it a different tag. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and sure enough, we get 2 tests, and they are successful. Because again, what happens with these generic foreign keys is it's not a hard association, so it actually doesn't matter at all if that object exists. All that really matters in this case with how our model is set up is that we actually set the content type, right? So whatever this object ID, it's not verifying what this content object is, which could be something that you want to have happen or not. It's completely up to you on how that goes about. Okay, so that is via content type, but what we can do is we can actually take this a little bit further and use the content type for the model. So we're going to do another test. So we're going to test create via model content type. And all this is going to do is also do the C type, almost the exact same thing. So I'll go ahead and copy a few lines here. And I'm going to get rid of the comment. And so what I actually am just trying to test here is that this is now get for model, and then we can actually just grab the model class itself. So playlist, something that I already imported up here, right? Just another way to actually get the model's content type from the direct import. Okay, so that's cool. I'm not going to run the test on that one just yet. I will do another test and said get test create via app loader content type. Okay, so what is the app loader? Well, this is yet another way to import a model class. So we'll do from Django.apps. We're going to import apps. Okay, so inside of the app loader, we want to go ahead and grab what the model class is. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and say that the playlist class equals to, well, this is apps.getModel app label equaling to playlist, and then model name equaling to playlist. Or this should be playlists, just like the model name. Okay, so again, we can test that same thing out, and it grabs it for me. Now I'm going to go ahead and run these tests, and we get several different ways on how to do this. Okay, so hopefully what this also shows you is a couple things. That you can actually create models from content types, right? So we can get it from the content type model class. We can create objects that way. And we can also do it from apps.getModel. Right? I just wanted to show you those several different ways because it's identical. You'll see this in other places. This is not really that practical of a test, but it is really good knowledge to have when it comes to creating these things in different ways. Don't worry, you don't necessarily have to remember this, or even if you didn't type it, I do have a reference file that we'll go over in just a moment. Okay, so now that we've got this, I now want to test actually setting this data on a related field. So what that means is up here in my actual playlist model, right? So if we look at that playlist model, we have the generic relation field, right? So generic relation, this field right here, I actually want to test that actually works. So one of the ways we're going to do it is, first off, is going in here, and we'll go ahead and say self.plybobj.tags.add, and now we're going to add a new tagged item here. So we can do tagged item, and tag equals to new tag, and then bulk equaling to false. Let's actually make sure that this is a slugged item here. Okay, oops, not bulk in here, but bulk out here. Okay, so that is a really nice and shortcut way to add this. Now, if you try to do it something more like this, so tag equals to that, and then add it here, you're going to get an error. So you actually need to initialize it just like this. And again, not doing tagged item.objects.create like we did with that integrity error. Okay. So now that we've got this, let's just go ahead and test that related field. This, of course, is very relevant now. So we're going to define test related field, and it's going to take in self. And all we want to do here is say self.assert equal, and it's going to be self.plya, as in playlist, or rather playlist, do we call it plya, or no, we called it plyobj, and then .tags.count being 1. Okay, so we just want to verify that the way I tested that, it actually does correctly associate the tag. And it did. Pretty cool. Now, of course, there's actually another way to create these tags. So let's go ahead and do this and say test related field create. And now what we can do is still take this item here and say tags.create, and tag being another new tag. And of course, this should now be 2, should increment the default setup, right? We're only incrementing it here, so this shouldn't break. Okay, cool. So that is another way to do it. Now, there are other ways that we'll mention in the reference in just a moment, but these are very common ways to do it. Is actually creating it right here in line, or creating it like this. Okay, cool. So now we have one more test that we could actually run, is just verifying any given content type of a playlist or something like that. You could absolutely run that. I'm not going to do that one. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define test related field query name. And what I'm testing here is this related field query name right here. Okay, so I'm going to get a query set, and this is going to be tagged item.objects.filter, and this is going to be playlist title equals to our playlist title up here. And I can actually say iExact and that playlist title. In fact, let's go ahead and make that, and I'll just do self.ply title being that string of new title. And actually, let's set it like this first. Make sure it's all set up, and self.ply title equals to that title. Okay, and so now this filter down here is going to go based off of that exact title, and what we should get is a true value. Self.assert, let's say equal actually, and that's qs.count is equal to 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. And now we've got all of the correct tests for this. Now, of course, we could add additional features to each one of the actual tagged items and the related field, but the vast majority of things that we would want to test are now being tested, especially this related query name. Now, there is absolutely another way to do a query set, right? So it actually comes down to the content type part of things. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this one. So now what I'm going to do is say test the query set based off of the content type. So test related field via content type. Okay, so we've got our content type here. We no longer need to create it. Instead, we need a filter by that content type and an object ID. This time the object ID should absolutely go off of something we already set up because of adding that, right? No surprise there. So self.playlistObject.id. We want to filter it based off of that. And we can also filter the title as well. Well, actually, no, we can't because we don't have that related field in this at this point. So really what we want is to make sure that this tag query set is also just one. Okay, so I'll explain the difference between the numbers here. So self.assert equal and qs.count is 1, or tag qs rather. Okay, so let's try that again. Run the tests, and successful. Okay, cool. So the difference between this query set and this one is this is actually filtering for playlists with this title, this exact title, and the tag or tags that are associated to that. So if I accidentally created 2 of them with the exact same title, accidentally or intentionally, let's go ahead and run it now. Now we should actually, oops, let's see, maybe I didn't save it. Let's try that again. And no, it's giving us too many. Oh yes, we actually need to add the tags again. Let's try that again. So now we've got 2 tags and the title. Let's try it again. Okay, cool. So now we've got the query set is invalid. So test related field name, right? So it's actually giving us 2 back because there are 2 tagged items that are associated with that exact same playlist of that exact same title. So we save that. Now what about content type? Now if I run that, it actually doesn't give me the same error. Of course not, right? So what it's looking for now is the number of tags that are associated to this particular object, not necessarily all of the tags that have that same playlist title. Hopefully that's not too confusing. I mean, it's a little tricky maybe, but overall, hopefully that's pretty good. Okay, so there is still one more way to actually create tagged items from any given object, and that is simply doing, let's say self, we could actually do tagged. Let's actually make it a little test here. And we could do define test direct object creation, and takes in self. So the object is going to be self.ply obj. So now we can actually just create the tag and do tag is tagged item.objects.create. And now we can do content object equals to obj and the tag equals to another one. And again, we'll do self.assert is not none tag.pk. Save that and run these tests. Cool. Okay. This one is also fairly common as to how you're going to set and create tags. So now I have a reference for this, and the Django documentation is also very good for this. Of course, if you want to see it in Markdown, you can either see it in Markdown right into VS Code, or you can see it in Markdown on GitHub. But this is generally the idea here is we can set all of our different content items as we see fit, right? So getting the actual model, importing the model, I showed you a few different ways on how to import them, and then we can actually set them. This is the last one we just tested. This is a little bit more advanced, even more advanced, and a shortcut to the even more advanced. And that's it. that's kind of how we're going to be setting a lot of these generic relations. So hopefully all that's kind of clear here. But of course, actually doing the filtering and using these generic foreign keys really comes together when you actually start building more on top of what we just did, especially in a real functioning project. So I think we've covered quite a bit of the tags and these generic foreign keys. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, let's keep going.